Now I just got to make sure that we're actually live, and then we are ready to go. I'm actually going to tweet this. I think we're live. This is looking good. All right, I've tweeted it. I actually got to delete because Periscope automatically tweets every time, and I actually don't want it to automatically tweet. Actually, no, that's fine. I'm going to leave it up. Whatever. Welcome, everybody, to another episode, I guess. This isn't really episodes. I haven't really done episodes. I haven't called these episodes.
I mean, now it is.
Now I guess they're episodes. Welcome to another instance. That's a nice technical word to use. Welcome to another instance of the Max Show, I guess. Now it's called the Max Show since the last one. It was never called that. It was just called Max Stoiber live stream stuff. Today, we're doing a bit of a special episode. It's different than the past ones. So far, I've interviewed people. Today, I'm being interviewed. Sid wants to know a bunch of stuff about me, and he thought you might be curious too. So, take it away, Sid.
All right, so I came to this blog post. It's not even a blog post. It's a note. It's a note that you wrote a year ago, but shared it recently, which was your non-technical regrets at Spectrum. And to give context, you gave a conference talk about the technical regrets, right? And that's been everywhere. But this one is kind of like a secret note. We just discovered it. And reading this note was kind of like reading those articles on Medium, which is 10 mistakes you're making as a JavaScript beginner, right? So reading this startup, non-technical, gotchas or things that you got wrong. And I'm reading those and I'm like, oh shit, are we doing this? Are we doing this? So it was a lot of things were flags, right? My linting flag started failing.
Nice.
So I was like, I gotta have you on. We gotta talk about this.
Nice. I love it.
So why don't we start with so this is your show, so you don't have to introduce yourself. That's convenient. But why don't we start with how did Spectrum come around? Who did you start with, and when was this?
We started Spectrum. So, a good question. When did we start it? I don't actually. We were acquired November of 2018, and we did it for a year and a half. So it must have been February 2017, I think. Yeah, February 2017. I basically, Bryn Jackson and Brian Lovin, my two co-founders, were building a community platform for their own community. And I stumbled upon it because they were using styled components and they needed some help with it, or they had some bugs. I don't remember. And they asked me to take a look, and I took a look, and I was like, hold on, I need this for my own open source communities. And so we turned it into a platform for every community, basically. And we built it for 1.5 years, like I said. It went from just being a tiny thing that their own community used to being used by literally millions of people now. I think we have, the last time I had access to the analytics, it was 500 or 600 active communities, or maybe 400, 500, 600 active communities. But those are really large communities, right?
But these are communities. Okay.
Yeah. They're large. They're thousands to tens of thousands of people hanging out. And yeah, it ended with us getting acquired by GitHub in November of 2018. Like I said, that's sort of the very short overview of Spectrum. If you want to look at it, it's online still. If you go to spectrum.chat, you can take a look at it, check it out, join some communities. But yeah.
Nice. And so were Bryn and Brian thinking about this? Were they also thinking about it as a startup? Or was this a hobby project that
it was really more of
startup?
It was really more of a hobby project when I joined. That sort of turned into a startup because I was like, hold on, I need this. Can we make this a thing? And then I joined. I left my previous job at ThinkNew and joined them to work on it full time. That's really when it turned from sort of a hobby project that they were building for their own community into a startup.
That's an interesting time. That's what do you call it? A snapshot in time where you saw it and it clicked this is what I should be working on.
Yeah.
And you ditched your past job, jumped onto this one.
Yeah.
We're going to come back to that one. So before we get into the blog post, I'm going to post the blog post in the comments so that folks can read it. Let's talk about what went really well. This was your first startup, right? And was this Bryn and Brian's first startup as well?
Yes. Kind of.
Okay.
They haven't founded one before, but they worked at once before.
Okay. So it was kind of first-time founders.
Yes.
Let's talk about what went well. Like, what were things that you were thinking would work and actually did work?
Really good question. I'd never actually thought about that before you asked it. I think the main thing that went really well is that we got the viral growth loop right. Like the core idea of the product was good. Public indexed chat is appealing and useful. And the thing is, Spectrum, we haven't really, since the acquisition, we haven't been able to work on it much, but worked on the replacement instead. And it's still grown 100% year over year. It's still growing like mad. More and more and more people start using it rather than less, which is a sign that the product, while technically and from a product perspective, I'm not a fan of what we did anymore. We could have done it much better. The core idea and sort of the insight that public real-time chat is valuable is, I think, what we got really, really right. And then we were just three awesome people. I think the team worked out really well. And yeah, I don't really know what else we got right. That's
Well, it's like
now that sounds like we got everything wrong, but that's like the things that we got very right. Like those were the core ideas that we were like, if this doesn't work out, the whole thing is done, right? Like these were sort of the core things that we got really, really, really right.
nice. Like that was the core assumption that everything was built on top of, and you did crack that. That's amazing. It's so typical of us as developers to only remember like the hacks and the bad parts. Like you remember all the technical debt, but you don't remember everything else that worked.
Yeah. I actually, there's one technical thing that I'm really proud of, which is the overall backend architecture. We'd never really done a backend before. And what we did was we used Bull, which is this job queue Node.js module that's built on Redis.
Oh yeah.
And we used that in combination with like worker servers that handle the jobs. And that architecture scaled without a hitch. We've had scaling problems in every other piece of the stack, but that part has been nothing but rock solid throughout our growth, which was actually something I'm pretty proud of. That was a really good idea.
Nice. I'm glad I'm reminding you of all of this.
Yeah.
It's not all bad, Max.
Yeah, I know. Just most of it.
Okay. All right, let's talk about the big one, which is just before we started this call, you told me this note that you wrote is about a year old, right? Which is going to be fun because you do call them evergreen notes. So we're going to challenge like how green is it still? Yeah. And if it's not, like you can always like update it.
Yeah.
So why don't we get into it?
Sure.
Do you need me to like read out the
No, I have it open. I just sent a link to the chat too so that everybody else has it.
Perfect.
Just for some context, I wrote this like a year ago after we were acquired, just thinking about what I would do differently. Some things in there have changed. I moved that from like a draft blog post into my Evergreen Note system, but haven't actually yet turned it into an Evergreen Note, which is why it's different than all the others, basically.
Okay.
I have to split it up. Like it's way too much in one thing, and I need to iron out the exact things that went wrong. And I think I have a much better idea now than I did a year ago. But yeah, let's go ahead. Let's talk about it. I'm not sure. Do you want me to just jump in and start talking about it?
Yeah, go for it.
Really, the main thing I think we got wrong was that we tried to go too broad. We found, I don't want to say product market fit, but we found something that was valuable for a group of people. And specifically, that group of people was tech people, mostly developers, also a little bit of designers. And we built a product that they really enjoyed and they really wanted. And we tried to go broader. We tried to do things for everybody. We tried to be like Facebook and build something that everybody could use, which in hindsight was totally useless because nobody else used it anyway, right? Like the only people that actually loved it were developers and designers. And had we actually focused on that niche, we could have built features that were specific to that niche, and we could have really made the experience even better for them and attracted that entire market before branching out into different ones. That's, I think, one of the main things I learned is the value of really niching down into one little part, because you can just figure out what exactly are the things that these people need, and you can build for them. And then eventually, once you've like, if that works out, if you have every single developer community on the planet, you're fine. And then you can work on getting more communities on there. But that's like a secondary point, right? Like focus on your niche first and then expand, not try to do everything from the get-go, because that doesn't work.
Interesting. And like what was going on in the minds? Like what was the team thinking when you were building it, right? Because now it's like in retrospect, that was the point where it went. Like that was probably a wrong move. It was like, what was the mindset back then?
Well, we were really trying to make money. That was sort of our main goal, and something we never accomplished, and why we ultimately sold. Is the product is valuable, but we didn't find a way to make money, and we didn't want to do ads. We could have monetized all the great content on there, but we didn't want to. We wanted to sell something, and so we started building all of these business features. We started building all of these features that we thought businesses could use to build communities around their brands, around their own products. Except businesses didn't really care, right? And so we built all of these features that really nobody really cared about. Nobody ever used them. They weren't very valuable, and they were way too general. Like I said, they weren't specific to our niche. We just wanted any business to pay us, right? We didn't care what the business was. It could have been any business, but nobody cared. Almost nobody cared. Some people did, but only very few, and they were mostly our friends. That's really where things went wrong. I wish we had niched down and then actually just kept the growth loop going as long as we could, and then just raised more money, because we did raise a little bit of money from VCs. And I wish we just raised more money based on the great growth that we were showing and the viral growth that we had. But we couldn't because we were building business features. So we sacrificed growth for money, which never materialized, basically.
That is very interesting. And I hope like Yves doesn't hate me for like talking about code sandbox here. But that's kind of in the headspace we are, right? Where we've raised money. We have a very good community around us. But then eventually we got to pay the investors back and we got to pay salaries. Like it's gonna, not now, but like eventually we'll have to face that, right? And it's like, we've started talking about like, how do we make money from this? And, it's mostly around like, even if you want to raise more money, and I think that's the direction you were planning to, even if you want to raise more money, you want to show the investors some signs of either like something that's really working. So you have the growth loop working really nicely. But then you also wanted to probably signal that eventually this could make a ton of money.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of the rabbit that you were chasing back then.
That's a great summary.
And then just never found it, essentially, or didn't find it in time.
Yeah. If we had raised more money and actually spent more time on growth, we could have built a way bigger platform and then figured out from there how to monetize it, which would have been much easier than doing it at our small scale. Because even if we just own the developer market, we've already built a valuable product. And then we can take that and go to businesses and be like, you can pay us for this. And then we can figure out what the businesses want on top of the existing product, right? What else is there? We just did that way too early. Just in terms of like, if now I want to build, I eventually want to build another business. I eventually want to build another product, but it's not going to be a growth at all costs product. It's going to be an indie product that just makes money from the get-go, right? And that's just a different kind of business. And we just didn't know, we knew what kind of business we were in, but we sort of underestimated, or I underestimated, I shouldn't say we, I can only speak for myself, but I think I underestimated how much we were in that growth business and how much we actually had to focus on that compared to making money.
So what I find really interesting about this is that the business or the product still lives, right? So it's almost like, I really like this saying by Justin Jackson. He said, you can't A/B test life. So you kind of would never know. But in this case, like the product is still alive, right?
Exactly.
And it's still growing and communities are still using it.
Exactly.
So if there was a way that you were still working on it and started to monetize now, you could have tested like what would monetization look at this stage rather than at the early stage.
Exactly.
That's very, very interesting.
So for context, if you look on Alexa, Spectrum is the 16,000th biggest website on the planet. While their traffic numbers are way off, they're actually way too small. It's a pretty big website now. Like it's not small. I'm pretty proud of what we accomplished there. It's just we never managed to make any money with it, and it costs a lot to run.
So that you, in your post, you kind of get into what you think you should have done, right? Yeah. So one of them was niching down and only focusing on open source communities. But then you also talk about how to do more marketing.
Yeah, that was.
And you have this really interesting point, which was we should have told our story. I want to get into that.
Yeah, so this is something that I think we did very badly. we had a good brand. Spectrum as a brand was very unique. It was sort of playful, purple, which no brand at the time really was. We had a unique color. We had a unique style. That's all thanks to Bryn, by the way. Bryn is great at branding, and he did an amazing job. And it was sort of playful, but also generic enough to work for a community platform. Anyways, great brand, but we never told our story, right? Like, we're three people. Why does this even exist? Why are we building it? Why are we spending our lives doing it? And that is a great way to connect with an audience and to build an audience, is by just telling your story. People love stories. What humans love, really, communities are built around a set of shared experiences, right? Like, they're, oh yeah, I know this person, I did this with them. I know that person, I did that with them, right? That's what a community is if you break it down to the smallest part. And by telling a story, we could have built a community around the product, which we could have then leveraged to let communities use the product, or get communities to use the product. It differentiates, like, that story. Only we can tell our own story. Nobody else can do that, right? Like, only we have that story. And if you're competing with like a giant, if you're competing with, say, Facebook can't tell their story anymore, right? It's not relevant to what they're working on. That Mark Zuckerberg started it in a dorm room. A, that story's been told a million times, and B, it's completely irrelevant to whatever they're doing now. Literally no relevance whatsoever.
Nobody can relate to that story anymore.
Exactly. And so that's like a kind of a competitive advantage you have when you're working in a startup. You can tell your story. You can say why you're passionate about it, why you like it, what you think about it, what you're betting on. And that's a really important point that I've started doing now. I try to tell my own story just for myself more. And then now with Gatsby, I'm trying to tell its story and why. But again, in my lens, right? Like, why did I join? Why do I work there now? Why did I decide to spend my life doing that instead of anything else?
Yeah, that's also very interesting. Like, Gatsby is big enough now to not have one story, right? There are multiple stories inside there. But then it's like the community grows around the stories that you have.
Yeah.
And if it's like a multi-purpose product like Gatsby, then all of those people come with their own angle into the story. That's
exactly.
Very interesting. And you talk about like, I was thinking like this is one of those things that it's like a, what do you call it? Like a beating a dead horse, which is like, who comes up with these metaphors and who's beating or like who was doing that to actually create that metaphor? But anywho, you talk about like you spent a lot of time building features instead of like doing product marketing or like talking about those features. And that's like a very developer thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think we all do it, even though we know it's like that is the trap we are most likely to fall into. But that's the one we keep falling into.
Yeah.
Right? How did that happen?
I mean, we just kept building feature after feature after feature, trying it, but never actually telling anybody about these features. We did maybe 10 announcement blog posts in our entire time at Spectrum, 1.5 years. Maybe 10, maybe 15 if I'm being very generous. But like, we built hundreds of features. Every single one of them we could have just announced in like a 2-liner, and people would have been what that does is, more than anything, it shows momentum. It shows that you're putting love into the product, that you're listening to users, that you're there, that you're invested, and it shows users that they can trust you and that they can be there and come back and enjoy your product without having to worry about it going bad or anything. And we were building the features anyway. It's not like we weren't doing anything, right? Like, we could have just told people about it, and then we could have built up all of it. Again, that's part of telling your story, right? Like, you're telling the story of how the product evolves, how it goes from being this new thing that you're building brand new with literally one feature to being a complete product. And yeah, it's something that I wish we'd done more of. And then the other thing we should have done is build less features, talk more with our users, and sort of do more marketing, because we built all of these features, but even if we told anybody about them, they weren't very valuable. For example, I spent probably, I want to say 3-4 months building a WYSIWYG editor, right? So we changed our input from being just Markdown to being WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get, because we thought we needed a great writing experience. But actually, our audience, and that is another case of not niching down enough, because developers don't care. All of our audience at the time was developers. They were fine with Markdown. They didn't care about WYSIWYG. They were like, how can I disable this? We launched it, and everybody was like, how can I disable this? This is way buggier than Markdown. How can I just go back to Markdown? And we were like, but it's so great. And it was really buggy, and it took a long time. And we wasted a lot of time on that feature. And actually, Again, another case of we should have niched down, but also we should have been talking to our users way more. We did talk to our users a little bit, and we had like an open community, obviously, where people could submit feature requests and bug reports and whatever. But we should have really spoken to them before we did things, right? We should have been like, we're thinking about these 5 things. What do you think we should do? We should have had a way for them to give their own input without just a long list of feature requests, right? And sort of figure out what is the most valuable to them. What do they actually care about?
Yeah. I'm going to coin this. It's like you should tell your story, but if you involve your users in writing that story, then that story is going to amplify even more.
That's a great way of putting it. I love
That's okay. So, but there's so much retrospect here.
Yeah.
And I want to go back into time because it's like I can draw parallels from like every company I've ever worked at, where you have users, right? And I want to say you open source the code base in 2018.
Yeah.
Like early 2018,
Yeah.
right? And then so GitHub issues were open and pull requests were open, right? So it's kind of everything was, people could see how things work. People could also see what you're working on right now.
Yeah.
Right. And what's really interesting about that is people would complain, or people would complain about Spectrum on Spectrum, which is cool. So it's hard not to listen to your customers when you're building in public, right? Because it's right there. But what's really interesting is that those weren't the customers you were going after, right? So it's like you wanted business users, and business users weren't creating GitHub issues. So you had to like research and find out what they wanted. But there was this other set of users that were already there, and they were almost like screaming at you. It's like, this is what we want. We don't want a WYSIWYG editor, right? But what's really interesting here is like, I can only imagine like there was a lot of conversation internally about who is our customer, what are we like, who do we build this for?
Yeah.
Right. Was there a lot of like internal tension? And I don't mean like between the three of you. More
yeah. I know what you mean. Like I said, we just thought our customer was everybody. Like that was just plain out wrong. Like our customer wasn't everybody. Our customers were developers and designers and other tech people that were wanting to converse in the open about their thoughts and their ideas. Yeah. Not
so what's really interesting is
because it's just the same thing again, right? Like we should have niched down. I keep repeating this to myself because we should have niched down. We should have just built the product for our niche.
I really want to say like if okay, here's a different question then. If you had like some superpower where you could reverse time, right? And you could go back to the exact decision where you decided not to niche down, would you do it all over again? Or are you like, you've learned the lessons you wanted to and now you want to move forward?
I actually wish I could rebuild Spectrum. Because the core idea, like I said, the core idea is really good and it needs to exist in the world. I don't know how it makes money still, but the core idea is solid. Like that product needs to exist. But Spectrum is technically not good enough, right? Like it's too slow. The interface is bloated. There's a ton of things. There's a lot of things that we learned that are actually not in that blog post, particularly around building a sense of community. There's this concept in community research of this sense of community, which is really belonging, like a sense of belonging to a group of people. And Spectrum really does not have that at all, which is really bad for a community platform. And some of the reasons that it doesn't is that it doesn't have any barrier to entry. Joining a community is just clicking a button and then you're immediately a member, right? But that means everybody joins every community and nobody's really connected to any community. And that's really bad. I want to rebuild Spectrum, and that's one of the things I would change. I would add like an application to it, right? Like when you want to join a community, you have to apply. You have to like say, here's who I am in the context of this community. So when I join the React community, I go, hey, I'm Max Stauber. I'm the creator of style components and React boilerplate, and I use Spectrum. I use React for everything at work. But if I join the photography community, I say, hey, I'm Max Stauber. I'm a programmer, and I'm interested in photography, but I'm not really good yet, right? Or if I join, I don't know, the design community, I'm like, hey, I'm Max Stauber. I'm a programmer. I don't really know how design works, but I like systems, right? And like, you have to kind of apply and sell yourself in the context of that group, which immediately gives you much more of a feeling of membership because you've now done a thing to get into that group of people. And now you're in that group of people, and you want to be sort of you've shown yourself as in that context, I guess. That's one of the ways. The other way is that Spectrum was sort of too far on the other side of the pendulum. If you think about really dynamic chat apps like Slack, and then forums, which are really static, Spectrum was sort of in the middle. But actually, that meant that even in a community of 10,000 people, it always seemed kind of dead, right? Even though it's real time and it updates in real time and the entire interface is real time, it still seemed kind of dead because it was so segmented. And something I would do differently is I would immediately highlight the activity without overwhelming the user. Like Slack is really overwhelming. You open it and you have like 50 new messages in the morning. If you're in a group of 10,000 people, it's probably hundreds of messages in the morning. You just skip over all of them, ignore them, and that's it. With Spectrum, that was different because you opened it and you had 5 new threads, right? And that seems way less active, but it was still the same amount of conversation happening, but it just seems way less active and way less engaged. And so, like, conceptually, I would have some kind of activity indicator that just shows how much is happening in like an easy to see way, but that doesn't overwhelm the users, and then still be able to sort of dig into the individual threads. There's some ideas around how we want to do that. So I wish we could just build it again, because I would do the entire tech stack differently. I would build it. I would focus on performance much more. I would go build a mobile app immediately. I've talked about this a lot, but not doing it. Like literally all of our users were saying build a mobile app, and we never built the mobile. I mean, we halfway built the mobile app, but we weren't mobile experts, so we never dig into it. I wish I could just rebuild it from scratch, because I know exactly how it should look, how it should work. I know exactly how much better it could be and how valuable that would be as a product. I still don't know how it would make money, but at least it'd make me happy, because I know that the communities using it would have a much better time. I see a question in the chat, which is, you're saying you want to rebuild Spectrum from the ground up. Why did you leave Spectrum instead of reworking it the way you're seeing it? It's because
Michael's asking like the hard question.
That's a really hard question to answer, because I'm actually not allowed to talk about what GitHub is doing. Let's just say that GitHub, my vision of what I want to build didn't quite align with what I got to build at GitHub. Even that is probably said too much, but I just can't talk about it because I can't share any GitHub internal plans. But for example, the discussions are out now and they're fine, right? Discussions are fine, but they have nothing to do with what Spectrum was. They're just Stack Overflow for repos, which is cool and something that's sorely needed, but has nothing to do with building a community, right? And yeah, that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, that's a very nice segue into my next question. So regardless of everything that did not go well, still got acquired by GitHub, right? And I'm just gonna assume that you're not allowed to say for how much, but it's my duty to ask. Can you tell us how much, or are you bound by a legal contract?
Yeah, I can't tell you how much, but the funny thing is that we did not make a lot of money from selling Spectrum. We sold to GitHub because it was the best fit, right? We had a platform full of developers hanging out in communities related to open source projects. Like, who else was gonna buy that platform, right? Like, we could have gone. We had some offers from other companies, or interest from other companies, really, to buy us as people and just shut the product down and not use the product at all, or not use our insights at all. Which we just didn't want to do. Like we felt like we had a responsibility to the users of Spectrum to make sure that we gave them the best chance of actually being able to use the platform or something better, right? And GitHub just seemed like the most natural fit, which is why we sold to them. It's not because they gave us a bunch of money. It's because it seemed like the great fit, the best fit. Yeah.
Nice.
So I'm not a millionaire, right? Like people think I'm like a millionaire and I'm sitting in my yacht. I don't have a yacht. I'm living in a rented apartment. I'm not a millionaire, right? Like, I don't have a bunch of money that's just laying around. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna be honest. I actually forgot about the chat because I was like looking at part of the screen, and so thanks for reminding me. I really like this question where it said, where did you learn how to run a business such that you got to a position to sell your company, right? I think. So this is a question that also came earlier, which is, you have a lot of regrets, but it seems like it worked out nicely, right? I mean, that
Yeah.
depending on like how with the aspirations you started.
Yeah.
But what's really cool is like, how did you end up with like, how did you learn? Was it mostly along the way, or did
Yeah,
you
I had
have?
absolutely no idea what any of that meant before. Literally no idea. I we I don't think any of us. I think I speak for Brian and Bryn when I say none of us had any idea what was coming at us. Right? Like we were literally the greenest people you could ever find. Like we had no idea what we were doing the entire time. The whole time, every single day was like, we gotta figure this out. We gotta figure that out. We gotta figure that third thing out. There's another thing to figure out. And we just kept figuring things out as we got along. We didn't have any guide. Like there's no guide to building. Like there's guides to building startups, but there's no guide
Yeah.
to building your startup. And every single company is different. Is something I've learned. And a lot of the advice that you see online doesn't, like, probably most of what I say might not apply to your product, right? Maybe I say niche down, and you actually got to go really general. But for us, I know that would have been the right move at the time. That's all I can say. And it's,
Mhm.
yeah, we had no idea what we were getting into, right? And we, like, that's why I actually thought so. Well, I need to think more about the non-technical regrets, because I thought about them, but now actually that I read the post again, a lot of it changed. But that's why I want to think so much about what I learned, because we basically spent a year and a half in this world, and it's really, really difficult to figure out what you should do different the next time, right? And I keep
Mhm.
making the same mistakes over and over and over again. Jamie asks, because I have the chat open as well,
Yeah.
if my parents are business people. My mom, my, I definitely have great parents. My parents are absolutely amazing. My dad worked at a bank, and my mom's a doctor. My mom's a self-employed doctor though, so I got a little bit of that entrepreneurial itch from her. But really, they just supported me the whole way, right? After a while, at least. That's a different story. But when I dropped out of university, they weren't very happy. Now they get it, but at the time they were very. 5 years ago, they weren't very happy with me. Um, there's some people actually came from Berlin down, and before this whole quarantine thing, don't worry, and filmed a documentary
Mhm.
about my story and how I went from being in high school to being sort of this big open source person, and it involves an interview with my parents. That's really really fun. It should come out sometimes in the coming months, so I'll link that. But yeah, definitely my parents and my privilege. Like I'm super privileged. I could just work on that for 6 months without having to worry about money, just from what I made at jobs and from my parents and stuff. Which was obviously like without my parents, without my privilege, none of where I'm at now would be possible. Yeah,
Yeah, it's really useful to like remember, but it's also like a base, right? Like anything you do now is your fault, is your work,
yeah,
but like everyone starts at a different base.
yeah.
Uh, so in the blog post, you talked about like how the acquisition, like the process of acquisition, was extremely stressful. Like, how long was it? How long did it take since like did they reach out first?
Um, no, we reached out to them. The
Okay.
acquisitions. I'm a chill person. I've literally not been stressed in my entire life, right? Like, yeah, I've been nervous, and I've had a little bit of stress here and there, but it pales in comparison to going through an acquisition, because we were at the end of the road, right? We were running out of money. We had a product that lots of people used that we had to pay for, that we didn't want to just die, and we we had basically, it was either get acquired by GitHub or die, and we didn't want that latter one to happen. And die could have come in many forms, right? Maybe we get jobs elsewhere and then pay for Spectrum, and Spectrum still exists as a product. We just can't work on it anymore full
Mhm.
time. Or it meant selling to, like, getting acqui-hired and shutting the product down. Like there's various ways of that to die. None of them were appealing to us, right? So really the only appealing choice we had at the time was sell to GitHub, and that made it extremely stressful, because what we didn't realize about acquisitions is that they take a long time. From first talking to them to selling to actually closing the acquisition and joining GitHub must have been at least 3 months, if not four. And the thing that people don't know about acquisitions is that they're really about questions. They ask you
Mhm.
a million questions about the users, the product, the tech stack, the problems, the metrics, the founders. They interview you as people. Like, there's a million questions, and every single time you answer a set of questions, more questions just keep coming back from different parts of the company. And the thing is, when you're in that position where you have to sell and you have to convince them that this is a good idea to buy you, every single answer feels like it could be a deal breaker, right? Like you do not know what are deal breakers for them. So they ask like 50 questions about your tech stack, right? They ask how did the service work, where they deployed, where they hosted, like they ask everything, and you do not know which parts of those questions could be a deal breaker, right? We're using Zeit. Is that a problem? Is that normal? Is that fine? Is that we have no idea, right? Like we just don't know. So for every single question, you're constantly worrying about presenting yourself in the best light, but also thinking from the other side, what do they not want, right? Like how can we be what they want and not what they don't want? And I've never had sleepless nights in my entire life, apart from when I was hungover or something, but that doesn't count, right? But I had so many sleepless nights in those 3 months. It like literally I could not sleep because I was up all night worrying about, is it going to work out? Are we just going to die in 2 months? Like, is it going to work out? And particularly, it was stress that I messed it up. Am I a good enough engineer so that they want to hire me? Because if not, then they're not going to buy us, right? Did I do a good enough job architecting the technical stack so that they feel comfortable buying it without putting on too much technical debt, right? All of this stuff, I was very worried that it was going to be me who was going to make the acquisition fall through, and the other people felt the same. Like Brian and Brim probably felt the same. This is not like just me saying this.
Right. Yeah.
This is just what it feels like, because you feel like every single answer that relates to you or to the company that you built could just make the entire thing fail. And I had literally such a stressful experience. I've never had anything like it ever again.
Yeah, it's like you got a lot of premature guilt for like you just wanted it. Basically, it's like you've done things to make it work, and you just don't want them to like backfire.
Yeah.
So it's like you're already guilty about all of the decisions, but then if those are the decisions by which it falls through, then it's like, yeah, it breaks your world. Makes sense. Did you get any shit for it from the GitHub folks?
I mean, we had to fix some issues for sure. Yeah, they did like a 7-day. They hired an 8-person team from a security company to analyze our security. And actually, they didn't find as many security issues as I thought. We were actually pretty solid, but there were some, so we had to fix them because they can't. Like as soon as they buy us, they're responsible for it. So if anybody finds a security hole in Spectrum after they buy us, their own bug bounty program applies, which is where they pay money, where we don't pay money if a security, like we didn't have any money to pay for security researchers. Do you know what I mean? So they wanted to make damn sure that there were no security holes that could be found that were expensive. And so we had to fix a couple of issues. There was actually nothing too bad. I was pretty proud of the fact that there was 8 people like literally hacking our product for an entire week and they didn't find as many issues. But yeah, stuff like that, we just had to fix it. But then everything else we had no control over, right? Everything else, it was too late. If I was a too bad engineer, because they interviewed everybody too, right? Like they wanted to make sure that we were good engineers, good designers, fit with the company. If I was a too bad engineer, I can't fix that now. If the tech stack is too brittle, I can't fix that now. If we chose the wrong hosting provider, I can't fix that because they wouldn't even tell us, right? They would just be like, actually,
right. Yeah, and this was like months before the Microsoft acquisition.
It was actually, so we went through this whole process with GitHub, and then GitHub was like, okay, this seems all fine. We want to buy you, but unfortunately, we're getting acquired by Microsoft, so we can't actually buy you. And so we actually had to wait a couple more weeks, which was even more stressful. And then the Microsoft acquisition finished, and we were like, okay, can you buy us now? And they were like, actually, now that we're owned by Microsoft has to do due diligence too. And so they actually wanted to talk to us. They wanted to analyze it. They asked the exact same questions all over again. It started all over again. Oh.
And it's like they must have like a checklist, right? They must have red flags that you wouldn't even know.
Yeah, exactly.
Like if you're on Amazon AWS, cross.
Yeah.
There's no way you could have known that.
Exactly. Literally no way we could have known that.
Amazing. Okay, so we're gonna move like forward into the timeline, right? So now you no longer work at GitHub, right? I assume like your contract had a number of years or months where you. How did the move to Gatsby happen? What was?
It actually had nothing to do with the amount of time that I was required to be there. So usually people have like golden handcuffs, right? They have a vesting cliff after like a year, and if they leave before, they don't get any shares. That's actually not how it works when you have an acquisition. When you have an acquisition, if you leave before a certain time frame, the entire, like
Mhm.
literally, they fired the entire team. So you
Oh,
literally
wow.
cannot leave. It's much stricter than I thought, because I thought, oh yeah, it's just gonna be golden handcuffs, and it's fine. Like I liked working at GitHub, right? Like GitHub as a company to work for is pretty great. But it was a lot more strict than I knew before, which is also funny and something I didn't
Mhm.
realize. Anyways, I joined Gatsby because I saw a job opening to work on the themes team with Brent Jackson and John O'Tanner, and I was like, I get to work with Brent Jackson and John O'Tanner. I'm gonna try. I'm gonna take that chance if it works out, because those are two of my favorite humans on the planet, and I had no idea what they were working on, but it's Brent Jackson and John O'Tanner. They're gonna be working on
Yeah.
cool things anyway, right? Like I just want to work with them. Like that's like a bucket list item for me to work with them at some time in my life. That's really why I even tried to join Gatsby. GitHub was fine per se. It's a great company to work for. I really like all the people there. I work with some really smart people on some really cool stuff, but the opportunity to work with Brent Jackson and John O'Tender at Gatsby is just, I was just like, this. I gotta take this. Like there's no way I'm not taking this.
So was this before or after they showed um, blocks and what they were
Before
planning to do with blocks and theme?
before I
Interesting.
actually applied without knowing about blocks, and then I saw blocks. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I know now. I know why I applied. Holy cow! This is exactly what I want to be working on. This makes so much sense. Um, yeah, like I said, I literally had no idea what they were working on. Basically, I was like, it's that team that I want to work with. I don't care what they do. I'm gonna do it.
Nice. That's a very interesting thing as well, which is like in your. So I talk to some people about like career growth and stuff. Not that like I tell them what to do. I'm the one who's asking like, what do you even do? Because like at every point you have these million forks
Yeah,
in the road, right? You could do a lot of things, but one thing that like I've seen like a pattern is choose people, right? Like the projects change, the technologies change, but the people kind of make or break the whole experience.
yeah,
It's like always pick the people and everything else we'll figure it out. It's fine.
yeah.
It's
I
like if you hate
absolutely
the
agree.
people you work with, then you can't fix it. You
Yeah,
just gotta run away.
yeah, totally, totally agree.
Yeah, interesting. I'm gonna make a list after this call of all the people I want to work with, and then some of them I already do. So like
Yeah, I was about to
you
say
can't work with everyone at the same time.
yeah. You've got a great team at Code Sandbox.
Yeah, it's really nice team. That's the paradox of it, right? Because I want to work with Brent Jackson and Jono, right?
Yeah.
But it's like the people are in different companies. Okay, so let's talk about what are you working on now? And it's been like
Sure.
what, 2 weeks?
2 months
What? It's been 2 months.
since I joined Gatsby.
Okay. Then, yeah.
Yeah, 2 months.
Okay. Time flies when you're sitting at home.
I know.
So yeah. So then I can actually ask you, what are you working on? Because now you must know.
Yeah. So currently, I'm working on something called Gatsby Admin, which is basically going to be. I posted the RFC on the Gatsby repo if you're curious. Which is basically going to be a way for non-technical people to install plugins and themes and manage them and configure them, and work more easily on theme shadowing. That's sort of my main project now. The other project I'm involved with is Gatsby Recipes, which is a way to more quickly sort of set up certain common tasks. Like, for example, you can have a recipe for setting up theme UI or setting up Prettier or integrating a CMS, right? And rather than having to install a plugin and configuring it and using it in your site, it just does everything for you. It adds the npm packages. It does everything you need basically out of the box. It sets up Git hooks, for example, for Prettier. All those things you don't need to think about anymore. It just does. And so we're actually building that right now. John Alton is leading that together with Kyle. And they're building that the first version is almost done, which is pretty incredible. And the same sort of that base infrastructure will be the same that we're going to use for Gatsby admin and other stuff.
Very interesting. And so this is the question from the chat. Like, what's the big problem that you want to solve next, right? Like these are the implementation details, right? These all like merge in. What's the big chunk that you're excited about?
This is something that not many people get yet, but if you have a way for people to set up a new website, right? with all the stuff that they want. They can choose their own CMS. They can bring their own authentication solution. They can bring their own image host. They can bring whatever, right? And then you add onto that a way for them to configure their site without having to code. And then you add onto that a really solid page builder that actually works with code, which is blocks. You're going to end up with in a world where Gatsby is a much better solution for non-technical people to build websites than, for example, WordPress or even Squarespace or Webflow, right? It's kind of funny. People keep saying, "Oh, I use Gatsby instead of Jekyll," but really, Gatsby isn't like Gatsby is better than Jekyll, but that's not who we're competing with, right? Like we're competing with WordPress. That's the incumbent that we're trying to replace with a more modern solution. And the only way that's going to happen is if we expand our market beyond developers and also get people who aren't developers involved. But the thing is, we're doing it with developers in mind, right? Like if a designer goes ahead and he uses Webflow, as a developer, you can't do anything with that website. You can't change it. You can't add custom functionality. But if you use blocks, it actually edits the underlying code, right? Like, yeah, people can visually drag and drop stuff around and change the text, but it actually edits the JSX, and then it's just a pull request on GitHub, right? Which means non-technical people can suddenly code. And then if you can connect that with data from the CMS, from an image host, from wherever you want your data from, basically, you've got this super powerful solution that still lets you escape the solution, right? Like you can take what you built with the Gatsby page builder and it's just a repo on GitHub, right? Built with Gatsby based on code. Whereas if you want to inject Webflow or Squarespace, what do? You get a set of HTML files maybe, but then you have a set of HTML files. Nobody builds websites as sets of HTML files, particularly not ones with thousands of pages, right? Like those are based on templates with custom data that gets generated automatically. And so nobody's solving this problem, right? Literally nobody's solving this problem. And everything our team specifically is working on right now is, and not just our team, literally all of Gatsby, they're working on making Gatsby better and making it a thing, right? But we're focused on sort of the user-facing parts of that. We're really like Gatsby themes, Gatsby recipes, Gatsby admin, like I said, and blocks. Once those all come together, it's going to be incredible.
That's very interesting because like a bunch of tools that exist and are like coming up are like, this is a tool in which designers can make components.
Exactly.
Right? But then it's like, you don't really, like you can publish that. Now it feels like I'm dissing on modules, which I'm not.
No, actually,
so it's like,
I'm actually super happy with modules because imagine if you have modules, so a designer can build the components and then they can hop into blocks and actually build a page with those components. And all you as a developer have to do is review the pull request code and merge it, right?
Yeah,
and
now we're talking, yeah.
Somebody just wrote, like, it's a great combination is basically what I'm saying, but somebody actually wrote in the chat, don't make us jobless, Max, which I think is not what this is going to do, right? Compared to Squarespace, what it's actually going to do is it does all the tedious work for you. You don't have to build UIs anymore, or you still have to build UIs, but what you're really doing is implementing the functionality, right? Implementing the custom functionality that you have, implementing any like custom data fetching, like all of that stuff. Developers still have to do, right? Anything interactive, developers still have to build, which is really what we enjoy building. And so we're not going to be jobless. Just like specifically with this, we're not going to be jobless because it's all code under the hood, right? Yeah, it's just that non-technical people can also work with websites.
So that's the cool part, right? Like we've got our code tools in which we ship the output and nobody can touch it. And then we have our design tools, right? And all the new tools are like, this is a code tool for designers so that they don't have to code, right? But like it's cool. Like if you're one person and that's the whole that's the whole product. It's pretty cool. But like no company builds products like this, right? Like I want to get the designer's output and be able to work on that, right?
Yeah.
You want to ship code, you want to work with the CMS, like it all integrates together. And like I think that's the interesting part about Webflow, which is like you don't have to be a developer, but it's like I am a developer.
Yeah.
And I still have to work with other people. So it would be really cool if like the change log, the privacy policy, there's so many things. I want people to be able to edit it without having to learn my weird JSX format.
Yeah.
Right. It's like what's interesting is like there's a common base almost, and then everyone gets a different DSL on top of it, which makes sense for them.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, basically. And if you think about Webflow, right? Webflow is like both Webflow and Squarespace and all the other page builders right now, they have extensibility is like an afterthought, right? It's like if you want to extend something in Squarespace, you have to copy and paste a snippet of HTML and paste it into like this input that says this will be injected into the head. And so you can add like a script tag there that does custom things, but then you're hacking around the generated HTML with like jQuery or whatever, right? With blocks, it edits the underlying code. So if you want to add custom functionality, you just edit the code, right? Like a developer can go in and can edit the code, and that's it, right? Like they don't have to like hack around it. It's just extensible by default. It's just code by default.
Yeah, it's built for non-developers and developers both.
Exactly.
Like not leaving anyone out. Very nice. Okay, question for you. If someone asks you to describe Gatsby in one sentence, what do you say, right? And I'm going to give you two versions. One is like you're at a conference and you got to introduce yourself. And the other is you're at a family dinner with your uncle and he's not a React developer, right? What do you say to both of these people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm gonna answer the second one first. What I tell my parents or what I tell my grandma is really that I work on tooling for developers and non-developers to build websites, right? We want to make it easier for people to build websites, and really that's the level that they need to understand. That there's I don't need to say much more of the differentiation because they're not going to get it anyway. But in terms of at the conference, really what makes Gatsby special is that it's integrated in the data layer. And Gatsby's this is another thing that Gatsby's working on that I'm not directly involved in, but that I'm very excited about. Gatsby's gonna create a new category of websites, something that has never existed before. The work in progress term that we're calling this streaming websites, which doesn't make any sense because it's not Twitch or anything. But the way, if you think about it, right? Humor me for a second. Imagine you have a static site generator that takes data and then it can build an entire website of thousands or hundreds of thousands of pages in less than a second, or maybe less than 5 seconds even, right? Let's say less than 5 seconds. And then you have a CDN which can deploy static HTML files in 150 milliseconds into like 150 locations around the world, which is Fastly. That already exists, right? That second part exists. Now, how many more applications could you build as static applications? For example, if you take this very far, if you think rebuilds, let's say rebuilds take less than a second, we could have built Spectrum as a static site. And every time somebody sent a message, we could have just rebuilt that one page that changed and then deployed it to Fastly, and it would be super fast, super stable, super cheap, super safe. It would be essentially a dynamic application, but fully static, which doesn't make any sense, right? It's like a new thing that nobody's ever done before because all of this technology hadn't existed before. And the thing is, it would have been like performance is much better because it's just static HTML files at a CDN super close to you, right? Extremely fast, fastest way you can ever ship any site, never mind a dynamic one. It's super cheap because it's just static HTML files on a CDN, and you don't need to scale your backend, right? Because your backend isn't getting hit for every single request. It's just getting hit on every data change, which is much less for most applications. So much cheaper, much easier to scale, like I said. And yeah, it's just overall, that model could be a real thing. Now, we're not quite there yet. We're working on it. But Gatsby is going to get there within, hopefully, this year. We're going to take a big step forward in the next couple of months with incremental builds. And there's a bunch of stuff to figure out around that architecture, but that's also really exciting to me because suddenly you can build dynamic applications, but statically with all of these benefits, which doesn't make any sense, but it's really cool.
No, it's like there always is like this assumption that like we can't do this in the build step because it's gonna take forever, so it has to be runtime, right?
Yeah.
What if the build step did not take forever? Exactly. And then you could do it whenever you want and all the time. That kind of flips a lot of things that don't work on their head. And then like caching and CDN, if you like the moment you say everything is static, but you can keep invalidating it every second, the whole architecture changes.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And Fastly,
like you'll not build sockets, you'll build workers.
Exactly. Literally, Fastly can invalidate 150 locations around the world. No, it's probably more now. It's 150 milliseconds and it's hundreds of locations. It might be 200 locations. I don't know exactly, but it's like literally
enough for everyone.
Literally everywhere they can invalidate in 150 milliseconds, flat. That is insane. Like that just does not make sense to me at all. But they make it work. They make it happen, and that sets us up, combined with what Gatsby's working on, to really create this new sort of category of website that has never really existed before. Which for me is really exciting because I wish that it existed when we were building Spectrum, because that would have solved literally 90% of our scaling problems.
Yeah.
Or probably.
Yeah, that's most of it.
Yeah.
It's like we just figure out how to show notifications to people when a new message arrives.
Exactly.
It's like basically the only thing left is like you don't want people to reload.
Exactly.
Like a new static serve needs reading.
Updates. Exactly.
But that's like one thing in the entire stack.
Yeah, and that's like only for chat applications. But imagine for any other dynamic application, you could just build it with with this architecture, and it would just work. Like
very, very interesting. It's like I like how you call it. It's a new category of websites.
Yeah.
Because like one part of it is like, we call it the Jamstack, and then Jamstack right now can do some things really well, but there are a few things that doesn't fall into that category. This is kind of like extending, almost like changing the basics. And then you're like, first of all, people are going to start building things that we don't think typically as should be a static site as static sites. And then that whole thing is going to spin off so many different, it's how like WebSockets were introduced. And then it opened like an entire, I want to say industry of things that did not exist.
Yeah, exactly.
That you could do now. That's amazing.
I just posted a link in the chat to a blog post by one of my colleagues, Josh, who's super great. And he wrote a long blog post explaining from sort of first principles why this is super valuable and what it could be useful for and how it's going to work. Would highly recommend reading this if you're into creating new categories of websites.
Very cool. Okay, we're going to zoom back in now. So enough about Gatsby. Also enough about the future. Like I have the patience of a hamster. So like we'll talk about it when we get there again. But I want to talk about like what you're doing now. So again, like you've started sharing a lot of notes on Twitter. You're maintaining like a public notes thing. I don't know what to call it. It's like you call it Evergreen Note, and he calls it Evergreen Note, right? Yeah. And then so some of the words like you're thinking by writing. You're trying to get more parts on the table. You're talking to more people. Like you're doing this in public instead of like in a coffee shop. So what's the story there? Tell me, like, give us the full picture of you. It wasn't always like this, right? Like what I just sparks connected?
I just started doing this, and the reason I dug into that topic at all is because I joined Gatsby, and I was suddenly in a room with John O'Tanner and Brent Jackson. I was like, these two people have been ahead of the curve by 5 years for a decade. I am now supposed to be ahead of the curve by 5 years and keep staying there. How the hell do I do that? And so there's actually a great book called Where Good Ideas Come From. And it talks sort of about innovation. And sort of the core thing that it talks about is that innovation is never a sudden jump. Right? Like that spark of inspiration hits, but it's not a spark of inspiration based on, literally out of the blue that has no connection to anything else, right? The way innovation happens is because it's you're going into the adjacent possible. You're combining things that work that in new ways. That's really every single time it's happened. Like for example, Gutenberg, who invented the printing press, that's one of the examples in the book. It seems like a step, like a million years forward, right? It's like, how did this guy come up with this, right? But Gutenberg was actually really deep in the letterpress community, and he was actually also really deep in the writing community, and he was also really deep in the newspaper community, and he got all of these varied inputs from these different people that didn't really talk with each other, and so he managed to combine these things in a new way that led us to the printing press and to print the books and to everything that's happened since, right? And it wasn't like that sudden leap of imagination where he was like out of the blue, like, oh, what if it worked this way, right? It was like he had spent time with people that were sort of adjacent to this topic and then combined all these different things in new ways. Anyways, so long story short, I thought a lot about how I can apply that to my own work, right? Like, how can I do this? And a lot of the things that I tried to do and that I wrote about so far have been about this topic of innovation and how I can do it. And a big part of that is getting more parts on the table, which is having more inputs, right? The more inputs you have, the more you can combine things in new ways. Because if you don't know anything, then you can't combine anything in new ways, right? And so we really, it's all about talking to people, having an aptitude for serendipity, being at the right place at the right time, just trying to have a diverse group of people, all these different things that I try to do, they're all related to this. And as part of that, I looked at one of the most creative people I know, which is Andy Matuszak, who worked at Apple and defined a lot of the early iOS sort of interface. The reason smartphones look the way they do now, or some parts of them, is because Andy Matuszak made them that way, right? And he then joined Khan Academy, and he worked on R&D at Khan Academy for 5 years and explored a bunch of different ways education could work in the future. And anyways, he's amazing, and he's now working on some crazy spaced repetition stuff that is just mind-blowing. Anyways, long story short, he has this notes thing, and he has this idea that he writes to think, where essentially he sits down every single morning for an hour. He calls this, or 2 hours actually, he calls this his writing practice. And he just sits down and he does nothing but think and write about what he thinks about. And he doesn't just think randomly. He doesn't just sit there and like, the grass is green today, right? Like he has topics that he thinks about, and then he turns them into what he calls evergreen notes. And evergreen notes are, compared to other note taking, we're just writing a bunch of pages after page after page. Evergreen notes are like things that you can refer back to. So he writes about one topic and he turns that into one note, and it's concise and it contains only what is specific to that one topic. And then he links out to all these other things that are related to it, right? Depending on where he needs to make an argument, just links out to another note where he wrote about that specific argument. And the thing is, I started doing that with the ideas that I have and with the thoughts that I have. And what I realized is that it clarifies your thinking, because you're sitting there thinking deeply about a topic, and how do you actually split this up into pieces? What are the different things that are related to this? How do they combine together? Where do they overlap? How are they, where's the borders? Like, it clarifies the ideas in your head. So for example, when I looked at this non-technical regrets blog post about Spectrum right now, I can see that those things are not evergreen notes, because every single one of these things sort of overlap, and I haven't thought enough about them to really make them into their, like, really extract the core lessons out of them, right? They're all sort of kind of related to each other, and they overlap, and they're kind of right, but also I kind of disagree with some of them now, and they're like, I gotta sit down and actually think about this and be like, okay, what are the actual things that we did right and wrong, and why? And what is sort of the distinct pieces to that I can take away from it? And actually, I'm going to do that tomorrow morning, because now I'm actually really into that topic again, so I might as well.
Like a prompt.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, so I think we talked about this, like, I think only like 10 days ago, where you introduced it to me, and then I started doing it. So now, first hour of every day, I sit down, I have like a bunch of prompts of things I want to think about. And then the weird part about this is, like, there are two weird parts about this. The first one is, initially it feels very inorganic, right? It's like, today I'm going to sit and think, right? We consider thinking to be this like spark of a genius kind of thing, like apple falls on Newton. It's like, it's not the first apple that's ever fallen, right?
Yeah.
But it's like he was thinking about like the concepts in that space for long enough that he could connect the dots. It's almost like forcing yourself to be able to think on a topic, right? And I think I'm still not comfortable with it, but it's like takes me a while to get into the zone. But once I'm in, it's brilliant, right? I'm focused on writing for like 30 minutes at least. And then what's it? I want to say it's like, I really like that you call it a thinking practice, because that's what it is, right? It's not really about the notes that you write. It's about articulating these random thoughts that we have in our head. Like, there are a lot of anxieties I have about work, right? And I just like listed them as prompts, and now I pick one, start writing. Like, I think, again, like, I think Evers is cool with sharing this. It's like, one of the anxieties I have is Microsoft as a thing, right? So like, Microsoft is this giant company that builds an IDE. They also have an online IDE, and they seem to be pretty cool about community now, right? This is how we would describe Code Sandbox, right?
Yeah, right.
And so you don't want to describe yourself the same way as like giant mammoth company, right? So that's the anxiety I had. But like, when I sat down and wrote about it, now I don't feel anxious about it, because like the things I was worried about was like things I did not want to explore, right? And once I've like explored those thoughts, now I'm like, fine. Like they have what they have, we have what we have. There's enough room for everyone.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
there's
yeah,
still a
yeah.
lot of cool things that we can do around Microsoft. So why not?
I love that.
And so it's like, yeah, it's somebody just said it sounds like we're talking about meditation.
In a way, but it's a lot more permanent, because with meditation you sit down and you think, and in depending on which kind of meditation you do, you might even try not to think, which is a different thing, right? Like that has nothing to do with this. What we're really doing is we're solidifying our ideas and our thinking, and we're actually spending time persisting our ideas and persisting our thoughts. And actually, the funny thing is, I write something one morning. This has happened like 10 times or 20 times at least. I've written something and I wrote like 3 notes in the morning, and then I come back the next day and I realize 3/4 of it was actually wrong, and I actually end up turning those 3 notes into 5 different notes that are structured slightly differently. And actually, then I'm happy with it. I'm like, oh, actually, this makes so much more sense. This has happened like 20 times, where by the act of just thinking about it and writing it down and sort of putting it into these separate, distinct pieces, it turns out that actually my thinking about it wasn't quite mature yet. It was like kinda-ish right, just like the non-technical regrets blog post. Like it's kinda-ish right. Like what I wrote there is kinda-ish right, but it's not developed. It actually isn't exactly the right split, right? Like all these things are kind of true, but they're also kind of not true, and like they're not quite the exact right lessons, right? Have you had the same experience?
Right.
Also, do you get into this sort of like flow? Like once I get into it, I just more ideas keep popping into my head. I'm like, oh yeah, now that I wrote about this, I gotta write about this other thing. Oh, this other thing. Oh, that other thing, right? Do you get that?
Yeah. That's where all the prompts come from, right? So like throughout my day, like I'll get like 1 or 2 things that I will write about. But it's like when I actually get to writing, the problem thing starts growing, because they're like, oh, I should detail this thing I mentioned,
Yeah,
right? And sometimes
exactly.
it's like, it's a word, right? Like you write the word token, and then a token means so many things in different contexts that you got to describe it. So it's like, it keeps blowing up.
Yeah.
What I can relate to is like when you sit down to write, you kind of have the general vibe of what you want to say, right?
Yeah.
Like when I read your document about like regrets, like non-technical regrets, reading it and talking to you about them are so different, because the note just doesn't have the same amount of articulation or
Exactly.
nuance in it,
Exactly. That's
right?
why it's not
And
an
it's like,
evergreen note yet. That's why I gotta work
yeah,
on it.
yeah.
It's because all of
So,
this context that I talked about just doesn't exist in a note yet, because it's just a random blog post I copied and I never finished, right? But like I want to turn that into an evergreen note where you can actually get the context if you don't have it yet. And you can click on a link to Spectrum and you'll see all the context of what happened. And then you can sort of have articulated arguments for every single thing that I wrote about, and what specifically we got wrong and why, and what I would do different.
Yeah. Oh, I want to challenge this, where if you actually do that and you start thinking about if you had to do it again, how would you do it? Like we talked about a little, but if you start writing about it, I want to bet that you'll find the business models hidden there. It's like, it's going to come.
Probably.
Might take a few weeks, but it's there.
Yeah, probably. Maybe. I just can't do it. I've talked to Brian about this a bunch. We would love to just rebuild it, because we know what we did wrong and we know what we could do so much better, but we're just not allowed to. We just can't do it.
Are you allowed to invest in somebody who does this?
That's a good question. I don't know. Maybe if you're building something, if you're building something in the community space and you're looking for investment, or you're looking for, just like talk to me. Like I would love to know, even if I can't help you. I would just love to know. I spent literally
It's like
years thinking about.
I'm trying to find loopholes in your contract now.
Yeah.
Which I want to say is probably airtight. Like it's
Yeah.
GitHub and Microsoft. It's probably.
I don't think they'd care really, but it's just a risk we can't. Also, I just don't have time. Like I just do not have time. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just don't have time.
I mean, there are other things that you can build without needing lawyers. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Very nice. Okay, I'm going to look at the chat just one last time. People really want to know.
Yeah, I actually want to know what you think about Code Sandbox and Microsoft now.
No, so I don't want to answer that for 2 reasons. One, we want to talk about you, and the other is that
fine.
it's not my story to tell. Like I have an opinion, but it's like,
so what's
I want to hear it from Ives. My opinion is that we kind of are built on top of Microsoft's tools, and the way Microsoft's going, the whole front-end ecosystem is kind of built on Microsoft, right? Like they just saved NPM, and all of what would have come from if NPM couldn't, like raise funds anymore. So I think we're all dependent on Microsoft stuff. So it's kind of becomes like the base that we all build upon. Like we stand on the shoulders of extremely big giants. But what's interesting is like there are a lot of things that we can do, that we want to do, that just doesn't make sense for Microsoft, right?
Yeah.
Like it would still be cool and it would still be like it can be profitable, it can pay our salaries. Probably can't pay everyone's salary in Microsoft.
Yeah, right.
But that's okay. Like we don't have to solve that problem, right? They do.
Yeah.
So
right.
we have like almost with like not having those constraints, we can do other things which make a lot more sense for us. What are those things is something I want. Like I don't want to say.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's like I want Yves to like tell his story. Like, I don't want to tell his story.
Yeah, of course. That makes sense. But that makes a lot of sense to me, actually. That's again, part of niching down, right? Like, in a way, you're niching down on your unique product and your unique audience rather than trying to have to cater to everybody, which is what Microsoft has to do.
Yeah. So like for everyone in the chat, this is a thought. So if it doesn't actually go like that, don't at me in the GitHub issues. It's that's why I've started calling my thoughts like unpolished thoughts instead of evergreen thoughts.
Yeah.
Because like all of these sound like I'm gonna change my mind like next week.
Yeah. I think
these aren't evergreen yet.
Yeah, I think the evergreen framing is just like that's where you want to get to, right? Like
yeah.
By writing these unpolished thoughts and turning them into notes, you're polishing them in a way, right? Like you're without writing them down, they're just sort of fumbling around. Sometimes you think about them, sometimes you don't. But by writing them down, you really think about them. You kind of polish them, right? And eventually, they really turn into this evergreen note thing where you're like, oh, I'm pretty sure this is the right the right thing to do, right? For example, the thing with getting more parts on the table that I was talking about, I'm pretty sure that's gonna make me way more creative. Talking to people, pretty sure that's gonna make me much more creative, right? Like I know that is a core goal of mine that I have to focus on in order to do my job great, and also in order to just be creative and be happy, right? And I know that for sure now because I spent hours thinking about it and going through, is it true? Is it not true? Why could it be true? Why is it not true? Right? Like, how does it fit with the rest of the parts?
Yeah. This is something I really like, which is there are things that we consider very like virtuous or like almost like art. For example, like creativity is an art, right? Designing interfaces is an art. But a lot of these things are closer to science than they are to art. Yeah. And like for a lot of people who are, I don't know, more creatively inclined, their process might be different, but it doesn't mean you copy the process, right? You want to get to the creative output, and then like everyone has their own way of getting there. Yeah. So like for us, it seems like it's embracing a more mechanical, if even, right, way of getting to those thoughts and letting those ideas like click.
I like that.
And yeah, like it's funny how you're chasing creativity, right? That's not something that like is a concept that we actually appreciate.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Very cool. Okay, what are your last thoughts?
My last.
What is one thing that you want to say? Let's keep it spectrum specific. I really love I like podcasts who in the end, like in the last minute, say what one advice would you leave people with? Like on the spot, put them on the spot to say like the wisest thing you've ever said.
Okay, like, I'm gonna say the wisest thing I've ever said.
Go for it.
Think more.
I hate that how that's not even bad. Like that's actually good advice.
Yeah,
I could use some of that.
I wish I had the thinking practice when we were building Spectrum, right? And I wish I had thought really deeply about what we were actually doing, because I could have realized these things ahead of time, right? Which is what I should have done as the founder of a company. Yeah, and I just got to work on that, right? And the next time I do it, I just got to realize ahead of time what I should be doing differently, or what I should be doing at all.
Yeah. I mean, the weird part is I wish it was that easy, but it's like, it's at least the next time you do your own thing, you'll have more paths on the table. which is already, I don't know. I'm sure it plays a big role.
Yeah. I'm actually gonna put a link to Andy Matushak's notes into the chat.
Yes. Oh yeah, I can't
Because
put notes in the chat.
because his notes are really what inspired me to spend way more time thinking about innovation and creativity and thinking about things. Basically, highly recommend taking his note system is deep. Like I've literally spent hours reading parts of it. Like it is massive. He's been doing this for a long time, and there's amazing thoughts in there. Highly recommend digging in. Very interesting.
Very nice. All right. Cool. How do you end Mac's show?
I don't really have an ending. This isn't really an episode thing yet. I haven't really. I don't really know. I gotta come up with like a jingle, you know. I gotta have like and then it's like over, right? Like you gotta have an intro and you gotta have an outro.
Like,
No, I don't know. I just thank everybody for watching this. I mean, I started it because I want to talk to smart people. Today, I got to chat with you, and I got to clarify some of my thoughts and got passionate about my regretted spectrum again and thinking some more about them because they were not quite right, which I realize now. So thank you for that, and thank you everybody for tuning in. I hope it was interesting. If you have any questions, feel free to ping me anytime. I'm like my entire note system is public now. That's because I want people to talk to me about these ideas. I want people to question them. I want people to come to me and be like, "Hey, I don't think this is quite right," or say, "Hey, this is I like this. Here's how I took it further." Right? I want people to do more of that, which is also part of why I'm doing this stream. So if you have any ideas, if you have any thoughts, hit me. I'd love to hear them. I'm gonna reply, maybe, I promise. And if you want to follow Sid, who's really awesome, at SidArtKP everywhere. I'm actually gonna link that in the chat too. And then,
like everybody instantly spelled that.
I mean, it's not that hard to spell, really. SidArtKP. I can spell it.
Never mind. I don't want to get into that.
I can spell that. It's easy. I linked it in the chat anyway, so nobody has to spell it. And thanks for doing this. Thanks for tuning in. I hope it was fun. Have a great Friday and have a great weekend.